Welcome. My name is Monica Worline, and it's my pleasure to invite you into this conversation and community focused on reimagining thriving learning environments. We've organized a 4-part conversation that focuses on a social architecture of thriving that we use in our classroom and that we think is also useful for reimagining thriving learning environments of all kinds. We'll share little glimpses into our Zoom sessions and invite you to this conversation, but truly it is meant to be an invitation to join a community who is puzzling together, imagining together, and reimagining together what our learning environments can look like and how they can help bring out the best in us and bring out the best learning that we have to offer for everyone who's coming together to learn together with us.
Welcome, everyone. We're glad to see you here, to see familiar faces from last week and new faces that are joining us for the first time. We are going to begin very soon the second part of our 4-part conversation about reimagining thriving classrooms in the time of COVID. And we're really pleased to have you here. Last week, we introduced one of our introduction practices of role and soul. We invited you to do the same through the Flipgrid, and I appreciate those of you who did that, and thank you for making your contributions. Today, we'd like to model another of our introductions, which is called appreciative introductions. It takes the same amount of time as a traditional introduction does, but we each introduce the other. And by doing this, we set the stage for the students to see every member on the team as a contribution and helps us get the students thinking about ways that they can contribute to the community as well. So I'm going to start this practice. It's brief, but I'm going to start by introducing my dear colleague, Stacy Semeka, who, in addition to being our DJ, is also one of my closest colleagues in the Center for Positive Organizations, where she manages the student programs, including our Magnify program. So when I think about my dear colleague, Stacy, the things I think about is that she's a mind reader, a tech wizard. She's absolutely committed to building an inclusive classroom that purposes the needs of all of our students in a way that prepares us to greet and support them in a variety of ways. Every year when we start Magnify, she says they better get ready to be loved. And I think that there's no way of saying what Stacy brings to the classroom than that. She's ready to love all of them and see them for the contribution that they are. So Stacy, I love you, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Betsy. Gosh, these appreciative instructions sure do lift people up. So it's my pleasure to introduce y'all to Grace Lindeman, who has been in every possible role at the Center for Positive Organizations. She has done everything you could possibly do as a student at the Ross School of Business that has something to do with positive organizational scholarship. She went from being a Magnify student, where she was known as the Magnify mom because she was taking care of folks even as a student in her community, went into being a peer coach, and there she continued to take care and love the community. And even as she graduated from the BA program into the Masters of Accounting program, we begged her to stay on the team because we needed her. I was thinking the same thing that Betsy was thinking, is that she's a mind reader. She knows what you need before you even say it. And even when we're supposed to be resting, Grace is still serving the people in the Center for Positive Organizations community. Whether it's at 8 in the morning or 11:30 at night, she is serving the students and being a great role model for what POS looks like as a student and beyond.
Thank you, Stacy. I am really excited to introduce Monica, who we often refer to as our fearless leader, which I think is a perfect way to describe her. She's the lead instructor of our Magnify program, while she also is wearing about 15 other hats in different roles every time we're working together. And I am always inspired by how Monica can use her kindness, passion, and creativity and just radiate her energy to our community, even through the Zoom screen. She's one of the most dedicated educators that I've ever had the pleasure of learning from and working with. And I feel so grateful to have Monica as a part of my life. So thank you, thank you, thank you, Monica. And I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Grace. I get the pleasure of introducing my colleague and friend, Betsy Erwin. Last week, she introduced herself as a cultivator of many things, including a magnificent community, which is one of the things I appreciate so deeply about her. But another thing that she is just magical at doing, it was one of her superpowers, is to really understand where the students are, what they need, and where they're coming from, so that she's always infusing into whatever we're trying to design. The idea that we can meet the students where they are and we can walk with them to where we want to go. And so it makes all of us better all the time, Betsy. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Thanks very much. Last week, we introduced an annotation tool as a way of getting to know the community. We'd like to do that again today. So Stacy, if you could share the screen, just to refresh everyone's memory, the way that you annotate a slide, which we're going to have you do in just a moment, is to go to the top of your screen next to the green bar. Grace is sharing. Thanks, Grace. The top of the screen, and then click on View Options. From View Options, it scaffolds down to Annotate. And when you click on Annotate, a bar comes up that allows you to select a stamp. You can select a stamp of your choosing. You can color it any color you want. And then we'd like you to annotate our next slide, which is just looking to see, of the people who are in the room, how many of you were able to join us last week, and how many of you were welcoming for the first time today.
Today, we're going to be reimagining roles. And so we're going to be thinking about a spectrum of ways that we use routines in the classroom. We're going to be reimagining routines, not roles. I'm stuck on last week still, so excited about it. We're going to be reimagining from what we do in the classroom to how we think about planning our course, to how we engage the students. And of course, we're going to be doing a lot of resource sharing, hoping to spark your imagination. We want to make sure that y'all have our next 2 sessions on your calendar too. We've got networks on the 14th of July, and we'll be talking about culture on the 21st of July. And that is what we'd like you to know today, but we also want to tell you a little bit why we do headlines. And so this is a routine that we do at the top of all of our class sessions. And not only is it a beautiful way for things that we want to share the students and we want to make sure that they know, but it's also an opportunity to co-create what we want each other to know. And students are invited to add whatever they want the rest of the community to know about during this routine time, or they could even let us know before class started so that we can get it officially on the docket. And so students have shared things from well-being apps that they wanted their peers to know about, to a blog article about how they were dealing with responding to the pandemic. So it's not just curated by us on the teaching team, but it's an opportunity to start the day with color, with order, a look ahead, and with a little bit of co-creation. So I will stop sharing my screen now and pass it along. We've got some tech check, actually, so I'll keep it. And I want to, another way that we get started is with with a tech check every day. And we want to keep y'all in the loop with a couple of the Zoom tools we'll be using today. And so the first tool I want to keep in mind is the mute button. And one of our best practices is to ask folks to stay muted until you might be speaking or discussing in a breakout room, just to make sure that we keep out any background noise. And in a different way of communicating, we've made sure that y'all all have access to the chat panel. Some of y'all have already been sharing, for example, some of the ways that you've been using music in your own Zoom classrooms. And there's also the private chat feature, so you could even talk to anyone else on the participant list. For us, that's possible, but we do know that some universities might have some privacy settings that might turn that on or off at the higher setting, but we have the privilege to make sure that those are on, especially for today's conversation. Another tool that we want to make sure that y'all know about is enabling video. And we find that that's really important to build community. And there's even research out and budding research about how this is really essential for building connections. And we know that that's not always possible to keep your video up, whether it's your internet connection or wherever you're located that day, or whatever room you're in that day might not allow for it, and that's okay. But for all the folks that can, we ask, please keep your video on to really help us build community and build another form of connection. And the next thing I want to make sure that we are thinking about is our rename function. And so Grace is going to help us share some instructions for how to rename. And I'm going to have a little challenge for y'all. So go ahead and mouse over your image on Zoom, and you'll see 3 little dots next to your image. And that'll come up with a drop-down box, and click on rename. For today's rename routine, my ask for you is to leave the name that you like to be called. So I'll leave it as Stacy, and then a 1-word celebration. What are you grateful for today? Something that's happened recently, maybe over the long weekend, or something you're looking forward to. So keep your name, what you'd like to be called, your first name, and then a 1-word celebration. Or sometimes a hyphenated word. So I picked pool noodles today.
I like that cheat, Stacy. Pool noodles.
Sometimes you can hyphenate it and sneak in multiple words. Sometimes you have to be a rule breaker.
That's right. I actually didn't do the hyphens. I put 3 words, so I was breaking your rule.
A little positive deviance is A-okay with me. We're okay with that in our Magnify classroom.
One of the things that we do when we do a 1-word celebration in this way using the rename feature is that we invite the students to then open up their participant panel and scroll up and down the participant panel so that they can actually see all the celebrations and what their classmates are celebrating today. And this is a way that we do this celebration routine when we need to do it more quickly than doing it in a conversation or in a breakout room.
We also encourage students to use the name that they want to be called. And one of the silver linings of online teaching is that we found as a team that we much more quickly learn students' names, not only their preferred nickname, but we're able to, when their name pops up always with their screen, just a session or two, we had all 46 students. We don't know how tall they are. That's one thing that we're anxious to learn when they come back on campus, but we know everyone's name. And so that's another reason why we use this routine in that way. In addition to the tech that Stacy's already introduced, we also wanted to go back to our Padlet for a minute, not only to show you where we've been. So this is a routine also as part of the tech check to connect the work that we did last week, the work that we're doing this week, and to make sure the students are well resourced. We give them the resources in multiple places so we know that they'll be able to find it. You'll see if you were on the call last week that our Padlet has changed. We are actually experts at creating Padlets inside of Padlets inside of Padlets. And so what we've done is gathered all the resources that were part of session 1, and we now have it in one folder within our Padlet, which is the session 1 Reimagine Thriving. When you click on the orange lettering, you'll be able to open that. Monica, maybe you could click on that and show. This will look familiar to those of you who were part of our session last week. And these were the resources that we had. But this week, we've added a second session 2 folder. And this will be the things that we'll be working on today and the things that we'll be showing you in the time that we have together. Additionally, we've created 2 other folders, one with our Magnify Essentials. So not only the syllabus, which we shared last week, but some of the additional materials we'll be sharing this week. And then we have our video library, the videos we've encouraged you to experiment with and be playful with, as we use the Flipgrid in lots of ways, both in terms of role and soul introductions, things that we're puzzling about, and sharing the science of the work we do with our students. So now that we have this background with all the resources made available to you through the Padlet, which we'll share in a variety of ways with you today, let's move on I'll hand it over to Monica, and we'll get talking about the ecology of routines.
All right, so I want to, as we talk about routines today, I want to use a definition of routine that comes from the work of Martha Feldman and Brian Pentland. So they would remind us to talk about routines as recurrent, recognizable, interdependent patterns of action that accomplish an important task. Right? And so we're basically talking about how we do the tasks of class, and the recurrent important ones. And it's a little bit like the choreography of class. So you can see I chose a dance metaphor visually for us today. And I think maybe Stacy's pulling it up so I can see her working on that. So there's another little bit of a routine that I can just share with you, because one thing that routines do for us as organizational scholars is they give us the means of performing, right? Whatever it is we're trying to perform. In this context, we're trying to perform sharing our class with you. And when the routine needs to be coordinated verbally, you get like a tiny glimpse of what's the routine going on backstage. And then there's this front stage routine of sharing. And as you migrate from performing in the classroom, doing your learning tasks together in the classroom, into a hybrid or a remote format, one of the things that we discovered is that more of our backstage routines showed up on the front stage, because everything just didn't run quite as smoothly, or we had more coordination mechanisms that needed to happen. And instead of finding this embarrassing and pretending like we were perfect and we were never going to have our backstage routines showing on the front stage, we decided very early on to normalize this and to actually talk about this with our students. It was especially important for us because we were trying to equip them in a short period of time to also run high quality professional online meetings with their partner organization as part of their action research. And so anytime that a bit of our backstage work as part of a routine came up, we tried to just call attention to it and talk about it, and talk about what was the routine and why was it important, sort of like I'm doing now. And if you can flip from feeling that that's a mistake to feeling that that's a learning moment, I think it's really helpful on taking the pressure off of you as the instructor or the instructional team to have everything perfect. But it's also quite helpful for the students who now live in a world where they need to run these kinds of meetings as well. In fact, Grace was just celebrating with us in our huddle this morning that a student reached out to her for help on running a major online event focused on race and racial justice, using all the tools that he had learned in Magnify for putting that session together. So the routines and sharing the routines themselves can be powerful learning moments. I want to remind everybody on this slide that Stacy now shared with us in a fabulous way, that we're talking about thriving classrooms. We're defining that thriving as the joint and simultaneous production of engaged learning and human well-being. And then with that reminder, we can move ahead to look at the social architecture framework that we introduced in our last session and that we're reintroducing in this session. So the social architecture has 4 parts, which we refer to as flexible social structures. And those are roles, which we talked about last time, routine, sorry, Stacy, roles, which we talked about last time, routines, which we're talking about in this session, networks, which we'll talk about in our next section, and the 4th is culture. And we talk about these as flexible social structures that allow us to, they're flexible enough that they allow us to design within them and perform them in flexible ways. And so what I just did was I forgot that I had given Stacy a couple of design questions. So Stacy, if we back up a slide, if you think about thriving and designing for thriving, just based on this definition, you can ask 2 really helpful design questions that sound like, how might we perform any task that we have to accomplish in our learning environment in a way that also increases engagement, right? And simultaneously with that, how might we perform that task in a way that also increases human well-being in some way? So just at a general level, these 2 design questions, and asking yourselves these questions as you think through redoing your syllabus or what technology you want to adopt for what purposes, can be really helpful. And then I'm going to ask Stacy to jump forward 2 slides now. And the reason that we have Stacy right now doing slide sharing while I'm doing talking is that I had to watch myself on that last webinar that I edited to share with all of you. And I realized, man, I should not try to share the screen and talk at the same time, because I was looking down and muttering and stumbling over my words, and I really wanted to coach myself to do a better job this time. So thank you, Stacy, for being my partner in sharing the screen. And that's another routine that we really advise. As you reimagine your roles, reimagine ways of doing simple routines like sharing the slides on the screen so that you can focus on delivering the content, and someone who's helping you can focus on what's happening on the screen, and they can adjust the slides or screen share the content or show the videos or whatever needs to be done. It's a helpful way of enacting the routines through that reimagined role ecology that we touched on last week. Now, in addition to the social architecture, as you might expect coming from positive organizational scholarship, we also have a theory of how to increase and support human well-being in our classrooms. And so I'm giving you a matrix here that I think of as a very helpful matrix for designing for a thriving classroom that combines Jane Dutton's thinking about the flourishing triangle and what helps people flourish in context with these 4 parts of the social architecture that we've talked about already. And if you put them together in a matrix like this, in every cell of this matrix, you'll get a unique design question that will help you consider the social architecture and an element of human well-being together. And by answering these if you went through this matrix rigorously and answered all of these questions rigorously as you were designing a course, you would come up with a magnificent course. And I know that because we do a pre-post test using validated measures in every Magnify. And we ask the students at the beginning of class a number of survey measures, and then we ask them again at the end. And I realize we don't have a control group and there are lots of scientific problems with this method, but as part of just being rigorous about program evaluation, this is part of what we do. And in this year's Magnify, using this design approach to remote learning, we found a significant statistical and qualitative difference on how much students said they can imagine their own capacity to act in the world, how much they said they can imagine acting to intervene in a community to make it thrive more, how much they feel resilience, how much they feel belonging, and a number of other well-being measures that we tested. So whether you want to believe our qualitative or our quantitative program evaluation findings, we believe that this method is really helpful. And yes, Bridget, we'd be happy to share that survey. It's one that the center is working on sharing with lots of programs right now. So anyway, if you use these design questions as you think through your in-person classroom, right? Or as you think about moving a class into a remote or a hybrid environment, we think these questions are really powerful for designing. And we'll move ahead one more, Stacy. So let's focus on routines, which is the element of the social architecture for today. And we've tried to break down the routines that we use into 3 different categories that we think are helpful categories for you as educators and for us as sort of imaginers to make it easier to share these routines. And routines are, of course, interdependent and flexible and improvisational. So the way I understand a routine is not the same as the way Stacy or Grace or Betsy understands it. But by putting us all together and talking about them in this way, you get a pretty good picture of the way we do these routines. So one of the aspects of this ecology of routines has to do with planning sessions. And we had quite a few questions after our last sharing about how do you plan everything that goes into running a session like this. So we want to focus on that for a minute. Then we have a set of routines about managing the session or managing the classroom. And we've been sharing a little bit of our behind the scenes work, just managing this session as a window into how we would work to manage a session when we have 50 or 100 students with us and or more. And we did run one of our class sessions where we had almost 300 people in our Zoom session when we had our showcase guests. And then finally, there's a set of routines around student engagement per se, and we will conclude with those. But let's talk about session planning just a bit more. And as we talk about session planning in depth, I think, of course, you would want to start with, and the way you would start any course, you'd want to start with what are our learning objectives? What are we trying to do? What are we required to do in this course to meet the credentialing qualifications of our program and our school and so on. And you know how to design those already. I don't have to talk to you about those. And then you go to what's the core content that we need to deliver in order to do that. And that part of your planning also doesn't change because you have your core ideas and core content that you know you have to plan. But what does change when you're thinking about planning for a session in a remote environment is that for every key topic, I think you need a main activity or a way of engaging doing something with the key idea. And the something might be discussing, the something might be thinking or puzzling or asking questions, the something might be using that in some applied kind of way. But it's very helpful to change the students' attention approximately every 10 minutes on Zoom. So you need, for key ideas, you need a lot of ways of engaging them, and you need to pace it at such a way that you keep the energy and the attention high. Also, and feeding into that is number 2 on our session planning routine design, which is, as we think about this activity, is it an energizing activity? Is it an out loud activity or a quiet activity? How long do we think it will take? And what comes before it and after it, so that we're designing for key topics, then we're designing for how those key topics will get enacted, and then we're thinking about how they flow, and we're trying to think of an energy arc so that there are natural quiet times and thinking times, there are natural interaction and talking times, and then you can move between them in a way that keeps the attention fresh. And the third consideration in session planning is, for this key idea and for this interaction that we're doing to reinforce and understand it, does this need to live beyond this session? And does it need to live beyond the session in a formal or an informal manner? And how often would we come back to it? So it may live beyond the session in a reading, and you point the students to that reading and reinforce where they can get that reading. And you have to give a lot of technological pointers here. Even if the students should already know, we find it's really helpful to say, this idea is in the reading that you did. It's in that Inc. article that we read that cited Barbara Fredrickson. And it's shared on our Canvas site, or it's shared on our Padlet for today. And you can go back and read it again after the session if you want to refresh yourself. Sometimes a key idea needs to live beyond the session in terms of you talking about it. So you may need to deliver it on Zoom live and then make a little video, or capture the Zoom and edit down to the key ideas and share the video back. The design documents are something we create for every session in conjunction with and in addition to our syllabus and other kinds of formal planning that we do. And we repeat the goals of this session and make sure our goals are tied to our overall learning objectives. We track pre-work that we may need or that we need to remind the students of here. We have a need to know section, which reminds us as a teaching team of what to talk about prior to the session so that we're all on the same page. We list materials that we need in the session or that we want to refer to in the session. And as part of the tech check, we put any link that we intend to use in the session here, and someone double checks the link and that the link works, and that it's available and the link sharing is set correctly. So that's a good way to double check what you're going to use in the session. We name our roles and we answer any questions about the roles. We also name what's going to be in our headlines, and we make that very malleable so we can be adding to that right up until the time the session starts, as students may want to add to the headlines or as we think of something. And then you can see here, we're not going to go through, as I said, in depth, but we use this document as both collaboration space to design and coordination space to run. So we map out on a relatively minute-by-minute flow what should be happening on the technology, so what's going on the screen, and then what should be happening in the activity. So what are the students doing, or what are they trying to learn? And we have shared a sample of that design document on your Padlet so that you can see the way that we use this as both a design planning tool and as a coordination and classroom management tool. And with that, I'll pass back to Betsy to talk a bit more about the classroom management routines we want to share with you.
And maybe Stacy, you could put up slide 10. So for online teaching, it can be kind of challenging in terms of classroom management because your traditional management strategies are obsolete in this new setting. So because you can't see and hear in the same way you can as you're moving around through a classroom, there are other practices and routines that we've developed to help build a rich learning experience in the classroom. So first, when we're thinking about designing new ways to reinforce core concepts and insights and key ideas, both inside and outside of the session. We have issues with Wi-Fi, pacing issues in terms of running out of time, audio difficulties. We do find that occasionally a handful of students join the Zoom on their phone. So when you think about annotating, that might be a good question to ask at the beginning of a session so that you know how people are engaging with the material. And if, for example, they're joining on the phone, you know that you need to reinforce the key ideas in additional ways. We do that in the way we've done today, the routine that we've showed where we've been adding in the chat to reinforce key ideas that we've been talking about. We also create space in our Padlet. We do have what we call the Science of Thriving video series where we use Flipgrid, so a very accessible and easy way to make quick videos to emphasize core concepts so that the students can go back and revisit them in addition to looking at the slides, or we don't even share a recording of our class specifically. Instead, we just pull out the nuggets that we know that we need for them to revisit throughout the classroom. Additionally, we want to create new ways of capturing student input and questions. And this is, again, a silver lining of online learning because we see that there are more voices in the room when we create ways for students to engage. We do this in a few different ways. One is we encourage students to put their questions in chat, and we have a member of our team, or it could be a student volunteer, who curates the chat questions and will bundle them and ask a few of the questions. We also, if we're running short on time, ask our students to put the questions in chat, and we address them in another way, either through an announcement on Canvas, or we may, at the beginning of our next session, address any questions that they have. We do, if we are fielding questions from students, ask a member of our team to list in order who's going next so that people raise their hand to indicate an interest in asking a question. We add to the chat the order of the questioners so that they can moderate themselves so it avoids taking precious time. The third thing that we do as a way of taking the temperature of the class is we have two techniques that we use quite routinely. The first is a Menti, which is a survey tool, and we'd like to use a Menti with you now. So Monica is going to put in, or I think it's Grace is going to put in the chat, a Menti survey. We have one question for you, and that is, what word captures how you're feeling about teaching in a remote format? So if you click on that link, you'll have the opportunity to input in the Menti the words that you're feeling that help describe, and this actually generates on the slide in the moment how people are feeling. Oh, so we've got lots of scared words. We're hoping that after this series, there we go with an excited, you'll be able to see the opportunities that are created with this new way of teaching and learning. But when we're asking for students' feedback, this is a terrific way for us to co-create the slide with them about how they're feeling by using this Menti tool. The annotate is another way that we're just creating a quick opportunity. But the annotate slide is if you have like a yes/no kind of question. We're hoping to ask a yes/no question of you later today before we leave about your interest in getting some tech help from us. What's neat about the Mentee or the Annotate is that they're anonymous. So again, having more voices in the room, people being able to share without feeling that there's concern about how others in the room will feel about it. So again, we feel these are terrific ways to surface questions and insights from the students. So with that, we're going to move over to talking about the student experience and engagement and how we design routines for that. Monica?
Yeah, thank you, Betsy. This is a question that Marlis was actually also asking in the chat. So I want to call out that I was addressing her question there, but I also want to address it here. We use deliberate intention setting at the beginning of our class to try to do some kind of rapid norming, and then we return to those norms regularly. So we use something that we call the Magnify Manifesto, which is a statement of principles, practices, and aspirations that we have created and co-created with every cohort of students in this class. So we carry it from one cohort to another. We introduce it in the orientation session. So right off the bat, we start with it. And the Magnify Manifesto is downloadable on your Padlet, and it's in your Magnify Essentials Padlet as well as in today's resources. So if you want to see the way we present it to students, you can grab it and download it right there. We also couple the introduction of the Magnify Manifesto and a set of norms and expectations for interaction with a mini appreciative inquiry on the first day, where we ask students to share stories of their best ever learning experience, and then to curate from their stories in small breakout rooms one principle that they would like to add to the Magnify Manifesto for their cohort. So we end up with several additions to this Magnify Manifesto that, that makes it unique for each cohort of students. And we try to return to those additions and the manifesto itself in almost every session in some way. We also bring this manifesto out and look at it if students are having a conflict, or if there's a team that's struggling, or if there are other kinds of ways where we want to help the students navigate a difficult interaction together. So that's one way where we set the intention around engagement that's in playful, purposeful, respectful, highly relational, building relational skills, and so on. And then we try to help the students understand that the routines that they're learning in our class can also travel, and they can also be used to help us adjust to them. So I'm going to invite Grace and Stacy to each share one of their favorite routines from Magnify, and we'll give you a window into how these look from a different point of view on our team.
So I'd like to go first to share about one of my favorite routines that we call light bulb moments. And so this was a feedback mechanism that we used on paper when we were physically in the classroom together, and we were able to translate to an online tool. And so we think about feedback as a gift in the Magnify program, and framing it that way helps both us as a teaching team receive the feedback that might help us grow or that might reinforce something to keep, and also helps the student frame the ways that they're giving us feedback and the importance and value that their feedback is contributing to a really strong classroom. So light bulb moments are this opportunity to let us know what to keep, let us know what's really resonating with the students, and helping us adjust. So even from day to day, we can get a little bit better and help make the classroom actually look and feel the way that's most useful to the students. And this tool also has the opportunity for us to strength spot any guest teachers that came to visit, and also helps us, so that we ask students every day to leave a gift of feedback so that we can really show our gratitude to the folks that came to visit us. And also helps us realize what ideas are really standing out for them too. So we can decide if we're going too fast, are we going too slow? Is there something that we might need to revisit the next day? So it helps us really feel like we're in conversation with the students at the end of every day, in a way that feels really authentic and really normal. And that we hope that students can help each other talk to one another when they lead a group, to share feedback in a way that feels like a real gift. And then Grace, how about you tell us about what your favorite routine is?
Yeah, thanks, Stacy. So I will quickly share a bit about my favorite routine, which is called Sugar Cubes. So this has always been one of my favorites, but it felt extra important and special to me in the virtual format. So like the picture on the screen that Betsy's sharing, this would usually be about 50 envelopes lined up on the wall of our classroom, and everyone has one with their name on it. But our Google form made it easy to still have this routine in an easy and effective way online. And so Sugar Cubes are a way of expressing gratitude or appreciation for the members of our community. And so I made it a goal of mine to every day after class send at least a few Sugar Cubes to students and appreciate something they contributed to the classroom that day, or to wish them luck on an upcoming interview I knew they had, or little things like that. And I think it's a great way to unlock positive emotions and connections with the community in this way virtually. And it makes it easier to make it feel like in-person Magnify. And so it was really fun to see how the students were eager to also share this far beyond our classroom community, and to send quick notes to our alumni or guests that dropped in, or to even share the practice of Sugar Cubes with their partner orgs for them to use in their organizations as well.
Now that we've had a chance to share some of our routines, we wanted to again go back to our Jamboard that we started last week. So just to refresh your memory, Stacy, I'll pull up the Jamboard. The Jamboard now has a second page. The first page will look familiar to you because that's what we worked on last week as you began to share some of your roles and how you could reimagine them. But on page 2, we'd like you to click onto page 2 and begin to think about how you might reimagine your existing classroom routines for online learning. We're going to give you 5 minutes. We're going to move you into our curiosity pods, otherwise known as breakout rooms.
Hi, Tina.
Hi, Tina.
Hi, Marina. Welcome back.
Love it.
Hi,
Welcome
Sue.
back.
Hi, Barb.
I can see Ace giggling about it being too short.
Too short, I know. We hope you at least got to say hello to someone else.
One of the things with the design deck we always try to do is to create accordion time. You know, if we have time, we'll do this, but the sort of the first thing to go and to be managing as our session runs. But we're not even getting to our accordion time today and running out of time. So sorry about that.
But in the spirit of figuring out how to make our sharing maximally helpful, we have a final annotation question for you. And we would love for you to also use the chat panel to put any questions that are lingering for you, so that we can figure out how to create additional resources beyond this session that may be helpful, because we know that we didn't have time to go in depth into many of the things we talked about. Thank you for joining us today.
Bye.